The autumn rain fell softly on the wooden eaves of the moonlit crane tea-house, each drop creating a gentle percussion that harmonized with the distant sounds of Kyoto's evening streets. Inside, paper lanterns cast warm golden light across tatami floors, and the subtle fragrance of matcha mixed with burning incense created an atmosphere of refined tranquility. Yukiko knelt in the corner alcove, her fingers poised above the strings of her shamisen, preparing for the evening's performance. She had been a geisha at the moonlit crane for 3 years now, having completed her training under the careful guidance of Okasan, the tea-house's proprietress. Her skill with the shamisen had grown considerable during that time, and she took pride in the way she could coax emotion from the 3-stringed instrument, making it sing with joy or weep with sorrow depending on the piece she chose to play. It was on a Tuesday evening in late autumn when she first noticed him. The samurai entered the tea-house with the quiet dignity that marked men of his station, his dark hakama pristine, his katana secured properly at his side. His face was handsome but severe, with strong features that suggested both discipline and burden. He took his place near the back of the main room, away from the other patrons, and ordered only tea. Yukiko played that evening as she always did, her fingers dancing across the strings, creating melodies that told stories without words. She performed pieces passed down through generations, songs of cherry blossoms and distant mountains, of love found and lost, of warriors returning home and others who never would. The other patrons clapped appreciatively, called for their favorites, engaged in conversation. But the samurai in the back simply sat, his tea growing cold before him, his eyes closed as he listened. When the evening ended and the patrons departed, Yukiko noticed that the samurai left a generous payment, more than the cost of his untouched tea warranted. She thought little of it then, assuming he was simply a wealthy man passing through the district. But the following Tuesday, he returned. He took the same seat, ordered the same tea, and sat in the same manner, silent, still, listening. Again, he left as the evening concluded, leaving payment that exceeded what was required. Yukiko found herself curious about this strange patron, but the ways of samurai were not for geisha to question, and she continued her performances as always. Week after week, through the deepening of autumn and into the first cold breath of winter, the samurai came. Every Tuesday, without fail, he would arrive as dusk settled over the city, take his customary place, and listen to her play. He never spoke beyond ordering his tea. He never requested a particular song. He never engaged with the other patrons, or even with Okasan when she made her rounds ensuring her guests were satisfied. He simply listened, and then he left. The other geisha began to notice and comment. Fumiko, who specialized in dance, teased Yukiko gently about her mysterious admirer. "Perhaps he is in love with you," she suggested with a playful smile, "but is too shy to speak." "A samurai shy?" Yukiko replied, shaking her head. "That seems unlikely. Besides, if he wished to engage with me beyond my music, he would request my company properly through Okasan. That is our way." "Then perhaps he is grieving," offered Ayam, an older geisha known for her wisdom. "Music can touch places in the heart that words cannot reach. Perhaps your shamisen speaks to something in his soul that needs hearing." Yukiko considered this possibility. The samurai did carry himself with a certain weight, a heaviness that seemed to press upon his shoulders even as he maintained his rigid posture. There were lines around his eyes that suggested either premature aging or deep-seated sorrow. Perhaps Ayam was right. Winter settled fully over Kyoto, bringing with it cold winds that rattled the tea-house windows and frost that painted delicate patterns on the wooden gates. Still, every Tuesday, the samurai came. Now he wore a heavier haori over his kimono, but otherwise, nothing about his ritual changed. Yukiko found herself preparing for his visits, though she would not admit this to the other geisha. She selected her pieces more carefully on Tuesdays, choosing songs that carried depth and meaning, melodies that she hoped might reach whatever place in his heart he was protecting. She played songs of the changing seasons, of snow falling on ancient temples, of travelers on long roads seeking home. She played pieces that spoke of duty and honor, themes she imagined might resonate with a warrior. And always, the samurai sat in stillness, his eyes closed, his breathing slow and measured, as if each note of her shamisen was a form of meditation. One particularly cold Tuesday in the depths of winter, a group of rowdy merchants came to the tea-house, already deep in their cups from drinking elsewhere. They were loud and boisterous, calling for sake and entertainment, disrupting the usual refined atmosphere that Okasan worked so hard to maintain. Yukiko continued playing, though it was difficult to concentrate over their noise. She noticed the samurai shift slightly in his seat, the first time she had seen him show any reaction to his surroundings. As her performance continued, one of the merchants, red-faced and swaying, stood and began to sing along, or rather to bellow, completely out of tune and utterly ruining the delicate melody she was creating. The other patrons looked uncomfortable, and Yukiko saw Okasan moving to intervene, but before she could reach the man, the samurai spoke for the first time since Yukiko had begun noticing him. "Sit down." His voice was quiet, but it carried absolute authority. The merchant turned, saw the katana, saw the look in the samurai's eyes, and sat immediately. The entire tea-house fell silent. The samurai's gaze swept the room once, and then he closed his eyes again, settling back into his listening posture. Yukiko, her heart racing from the sudden tension, placed her fingers back on the strings and continued her performance. The rest of the evening passed in respectful quiet. When the samurai left that night, he paused at the entrance, and for just a moment, Yukiko thought he might turn back, might say something. But he simply adjusted his swords and stepped out into the snow-covered street, leaving only footprints that would soon be covered by fresh snowfall. "He defended your honor," Fumiko said later, as the geisha prepared for bed in their shared quarters above the tea-house. "Surely now you must be curious about him." "Curious?" Yukiko replied, brushing out her long hair. "Of course I am curious. But curiosity is not enough reason to break with propriety. If he wishes to speak with me, he knows how to arrange it." Yet privately, Yukiko had to admit that her curiosity had grown into something more. She found herself thinking about the samurai during the week, wondering what his life was like, what battles he had seen, what sorrows he carried. She wondered why her music, specifically, seemed to draw him back week after week. She was skilled, yes, but there were other geisha in Kyoto, other tea-houses with musicians equally accomplished. Why did he choose the moonlit crane? Why did he choose to listen to her? Spring came eventually, as it always does, bringing with it the promise of cherry blossoms and renewal. The samurai continued his weekly visits, though now he wore lighter clothing, and occasionally Yukiko could see petals from the blooming trees caught in the folds of his hakama when he arrived. The harsh lines around his eyes seemed slightly softer in the gentler light of spring, or perhaps that was merely her imagination. On a Tuesday evening when the cherry blossoms were at their peak, Yukiko decided to play a piece she had been composing herself, a melody that captured the fleeting beauty of the blossoms, how they bloomed so gloriously yet fell so quickly, carpeting the ground with pink and white petals. It was a piece about beauty and transience, about finding meaning in moments that cannot last. She poured her heart into the performance, her fingers flowing across the strings with a passion she usually kept restrained. When she finished, there was a moment of profound silence in the tea-house. Then the patrons applauded warmly, calling out their appreciation. Yukiko bowed, accepting their praise graciously. But her eyes sought the samurai in the back of the room. For the first time since she had been watching him, she saw tears on his face, just a few, sliding down his weathered cheeks, catching the lantern light. He did not wipe them away immediately. He simply sat with them, acknowledging their presence, before finally raising a hand to brush them aside. Then he stood, bowed deeply to her, a gesture of profound respect, and left the tea-house without waiting for his tea to be served. Yukiko was shaken. She had moved people with her music before, had seen tears and smiles, had watched her performances affect her audience. But something about the samurai's response felt different, more profound, as if she had accidentally touched the deepest wound in his soul. That night, she could not sleep. She lay on her futon, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft breathing of the other geisha around her, and wondered about the man who came every Tuesday to listen and nothing more. What had her song awakened in him? What memory had it stirred? And more than that, she realized with a start, why did his pain matter so much to her? The following Tuesday, Yukiko was nervous for the first time in years. She checked her appearance repeatedly, adjusted her kimono, practiced her pieces even though she knew them perfectly. Fumiko noticed and teased her gently, but Yukiko could not help herself. She needed to understand this connection she felt with a man she had never actually spoken to. When the samurai arrived, he looked the same as always, composed, dignified, carrying his burden with practiced grace. He took his customary seat, ordered his tea, and prepared to listen. But Yukiko, who had been building her courage all week, did something she had never done before. She stood, handed her shamisen to a surprised Fumiko, and walked across the tea-house to where the samurai sat. Every eye in the room followed her, including Okasan's, who watched with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Yukiko knelt formally before the samurai, bowed, and spoke. "Forgive my boldness, Samurai-sama, but I must ask. You have come here every Tuesday for many months now. You listen to my performances but never speak, never request a song, never engage beyond your silent presence. And last week, I saw that my music moved you to tears. Please, I must know, why do you come?" The tea-house fell completely silent. Every conversation stopped, every movement stilled. The samurai looked at Yukiko for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face. She met his gaze steadily, despite the impropriety of what she had done, despite the risk of offending him. Finally he spoke, his voice low and careful, as if he was unaccustomed to sharing his thoughts. "I come because I must," he said. "Because your music is the only thing that brings me peace." He paused, and Yukiko waited, sensing there was more. "My name is Takashi. I serve Lord Yamamoto as a retainer, though the service I provide brings me no honor, only necessity. 3 years ago, I was ordered to commit an act that, while lawful and required of me, has haunted my spirit ever since. I do not expect forgiveness, nor do I seek it, for I did what my duty demanded. But I have not known peace since that day." He looked down at his tea, his jaw tight. "I discovered your tea-house by accident, on a night when I was wandering the streets, unable to return home, unable to face another evening of silence and memory. I heard your shamisen, and something in the music called to me. So I entered, and I listened, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, the noise in my mind grew quiet." Yukiko felt her heart constrict. She had suspected grief, but the reality of his words carried a weight that surprised her. "Every week, I tell myself I should not return," Takashi continued. "That it is foolish for a man like me to seek solace in a tea-house, in music played by a woman I do not know. That I should bear my burden alone, as a warrior should. But every week, Tuesday arrives, and I find myself here, drawn by the promise of those brief hours when your music allows me to remember that beauty still exists in this world, despite what I have done." He finally looked up at her again, and Yukiko saw the depth of pain in his eyes, the weariness of a man who had been fighting a losing battle with his own conscience. "Last week, when you played that piece about the cherry blossoms, about beauty that blooms and fades, I understood something I had been trying to deny. That life continues despite tragedy. That there is still meaning in each moment, even for someone like me. And I wept because I realized how much I had forgotten that truth, how much I had locked myself away from feeling anything at all." Yukiko felt her own eyes growing moist. She had not expected such honesty, such vulnerability from this stern-looking samurai. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly. "Though I must confess, I do not fully understand. You speak of an act that haunts you, but you also say it was required by duty. Surely if you acted with honor, there should be no shame." Takashi's expression grew more troubled. "There are things that are legal but not right," he said. "Things that honor demands but the heart rebels against. 3 years ago, I was ordered to execute a young couple who had been accused of treason against Lord Yamamoto. The evidence against them was substantial, their guilt seemed certain, and the law was clear. As the Lord's enforcer, it fell to me to carry out the sentence." He paused, his hands clenching slightly. "I performed my duty swiftly, mercifully. But afterward, doubts emerged. Questions about the evidence, suggestions that they may have been innocent, caught in political machinations they did not understand. I sought answers from Lord Yamamoto, but he dismissed my concerns. Whether they were truly guilty or not, he said, they had been judged and the matter was closed. But I cannot close it. I see their faces in my dreams. I wonder if I killed 2 innocent people in the name of duty." The tea-house remained silent, everyone listening to this confession. Such things were not typically spoken of openly, but Takashi seemed past the point of caring about propriety. "And the worst part," he continued, his voice dropping even lower, "is that even knowing what I know now, If Lord Yamamoto gave me the same order today, I would have to obey. That is what it means to be samurai. Duty above all, even above conscience, even above truth. And I do not know how to live with that contradiction. Yukiko understood then the depth of his torment. He was trapped between his obligations as a samurai and his conscience as a man, unable to reconcile the two, unable to find peace in either. Your music, Takashi said, looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch, is the only time I can forget this conflict. When you play, I am not a samurai or an executioner or a man burdened with doubt. I am simply a person listening to something beautiful, and for those brief moments, that is enough. That is why I come. That is why I cannot stay away, no matter how much I tell myself I should. Yukiko felt the weight of his words settle over her. She had known her music affected people, but she had never fully understood the depth of what it could mean, the refuge it could provide. She thought carefully before responding, aware that whatever she said now would matter greatly. Takashi-sama, she said formally, I am honored that my music brings you peace. But I wonder if you seek the wrong thing from it. You come here to forget, to escape from your pain. But perhaps what you need is not to forget, but to forgive. Takashi looked at her sharply. Forgive whom? Those I executed cannot forgive me, for they are dead by my hand. Lord Yamamoto will not acknowledge any error. And I cannot forgive myself, for I do not know if forgiveness is deserved. Then perhaps, Yukiko said gently, you must forgive life itself. Forgive the circumstances that put you in an impossible position. Forgive the world for being complex and ambiguous rather than clear and simple. Forgive yourself for being human, for having doubts and questions and a conscience that will not be silent. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. You speak of duty and honor as if they must always conflict with the heart. But I have learned in my own way that sometimes the most honorable thing we can do is acknowledge our pain, not bury it. You come here seeking silence, seeking to quiet your mind. But perhaps what you need is to let yourself truly feel what you feel, to grieve what must be grieved, and then to choose how you will carry that grief forward. Takashi stared at her, and she could see her words affecting him, breaking through defenses he had maintained for years. I do not know if I can do that, he admitted. I have been a samurai since I was 12 years old. I was trained to suppress emotion, to place duty above all else. I do not know how to let myself feel without losing control entirely. Then perhaps, Yukiko suggested, you might try doing so here, in this place, with music as your companion. Not to escape your feelings, but to move through them. I could play for you, not to distract you from your pain, but to help you sit with it, to give it voice through melody. She saw something shift in his expression, a crack in the armor he had built around himself. Would you do that? He asked. Would you play for me, knowing what I am, what I have done? You are a man seeking peace, Yukiko replied. That is enough for me. And perhaps, in helping you find it, I might better understand the purpose of my own art. Takashi was silent for a long moment, and then, to Yukiko's surprise, he smiled, a small, sad smile, but genuine nonetheless. I would be grateful, he said simply. Yukiko bowed and returned to her place in the alcove. She picked up her shamisen, and as the tea-house gradually resumed its normal rhythm, though everyone remained more subdued than usual, still processing what they had witnessed, she began to play. But this time, she did not play to entertain or to create beauty for its own sake. She played for Takashi. She played songs of sorrow and songs of release, melodies that acknowledged pain without trying to erase it. She played pieces that spoke of warriors returning from battle, carrying wounds both visible and invisible. She played songs of mourning after dark nights, of spring following winter, of continuance despite loss. And Takashi listened, but differently than before. He did not close his eyes to escape. Instead, he kept them open, letting the tears flow freely down his face, no longer trying to hide or suppress them. He let the music move through him rather than around him, and Yukiko could see the transformation happening, the slight softening of his rigid posture, the way his breathing deepened and steadied. When she finished her performance, the tea-house erupted in applause, but Yukiko barely heard it. She was watching Takashi, who remained seated, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking slightly. Then he looked up at her, and though his face was wet with tears, his eyes were clearer than she had ever seen them. He stood, bowed deeply once more, and left the tea-house. But this time, Yukiko knew he would return. Not as a man seeking to escape, but as one seeking to heal. The following Tuesday, Takashi came as expected. This time, when he entered, he nodded to Yukiko, a small gesture of acknowledgement. She smiled in return and began to play. Over the weeks that followed, a new pattern emerged. Takashi still sat in his customary place, still listened without speaking throughout the evening. But there was a difference now, a sense of connection between them that had not existed before. Sometimes, after the other patrons had left, Takashi would linger, and Yukiko would play just for him. They did not always talk during these private sessions. Often, the music said everything that needed to be said. But occasionally, Takashi would share more of his story, the weight of his responsibilities, the conflicts he faced in serving Lord Yamamoto, the gradual healing he was experiencing through their weekly encounters. "I spoke with Lord Yamamoto," Takashi told her one evening, several months after their first conversation. "I told him I could no longer serve as his executioner, that I would fulfill my other duties faithfully but could not carry out death sentences. He was angry at first, saw it as a weakness. But I stood firm, and eventually he agreed, though it has cost me status and favor at court." "Does that trouble you?" Yukiko asked, carefully tuning her shamisen. "Less than I expected," Takashi admitted. "I have lost something, yes, prestige, perhaps future opportunities. But I have gained something more valuable. I can meet my own eyes in the mirror again. I can sleep, most nights, without being haunted. And I can come here on Tuesdays without feeling that I am running away from myself." Yukiko felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. "I am glad," she said simply. Spring turned to summer, summer to autumn, and autumn to winter once more. A full year passed since their first real conversation, and their connection continued to deepen, though it remained bound by the customs and proprieties that governed their worlds. Takashi came every Tuesday without fail. Sometimes Okasan would arrange for Yukiko to serve him tea personally, a small acknowledgement of their unique relationship. They would talk quietly while other performances happened, sharing thoughts about poetry, philosophy, the changing seasons, the small observations that make up a life. Yukiko found herself looking forward to Tuesdays with an intensity that surprised her. She began composing new pieces specifically with Takashi in mind, melodies that spoke to their growing connection, to the healing she saw happening in him, to the feeling she was beginning to recognize in herself. The other geisha noticed, of course, and teased her gently, but Yukiko did not mind. She had given up pretending that Takashi was simply another patron. One Tuesday evening in early autumn, as the anniversary of his first visit approached, Takashi arrived at the tea-house carrying something wrapped carefully in silk cloth. He waited until Yukiko's performance was complete, then approached her with formal courtesy. "Yukiko-san," he said, using her name directly for the first time in front of others, "I have brought you something. It is a small token, inadequate to express what your music has meant to me, but I hope you will accept it." Yukiko accepted the bundle with curiosity and carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a shamisen pick made of exquisite jade, carved with delicate cherry blossoms. It was clearly an expensive piece, the work of a master craftsman. "Takashi-sama," she breathed, "this is too fine. I cannot accept such a gift." "You can and must," he insisted gently. "When I ordered it made, I told the craftsman it was for someone whose art had saved a man's life. He asked me to explain, and I told him about a geisha whose music had helped a broken samurai remember how to be human again. He wept as he carved it, and told me to tell you that creating beauty in a world that often produces pain is the highest calling. Please, use it when you play. Let it remind you of the profound gift you possess." Yukiko felt tears welling in her own eyes. She knew that accepting such a gift carried implications, would be noticed and discussed. But she also knew that refusing it would hurt Takashi deeply. "I will treasure it," she said softly. "And I will use it to create beauty, as you and the craftsman suggest. Thank you, Takashi-sama." He bowed, and she saw relief and happiness in his face. They did not speak more that evening, but something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing for over a year. Winter came, and with it, unexpected turmoil. Lord Yamamoto had become embroiled in political conflicts with rival lords, and tensions were rising throughout the province. Takashi came to the tea-house one Tuesday looking more burdened than Yukiko had seen him in months. He sat in his usual place, but his posture was rigid, his jaw tight. Yukiko played pieces meant to soothe, to calm, but she could see they were not reaching him the way they usually did. When the evening ended and they had their customary private time, she asked what troubled him. "War is coming," Takashi said bluntly. "Lord Yamamoto has made alliances and enemies, and it will lead to conflict. I will be required to fight, possibly to kill again, though this time in open battle rather than as an executioner. I thought I had made peace with my role as a samurai, but now I find that peace tested." "Are you afraid?" Yukiko asked. "Of dying?" "No. That is not what troubles me. I am afraid of what war will do to the man I have become over this past year. I am afraid of losing the healing I have found here, with you. I am afraid that the violence of battle will undo everything, will turn me back into the cold, empty person I was before." Yukiko set down her shamisen and moved closer to him, closer than propriety usually allowed. "Then do not let it," she said firmly. "You are not the same man who first walked into this tea-house. You have done the work of healing, of learning to feel again, of finding balance between duty and humanity. War may test you, may challenge you, but it cannot take away what you have learned unless you allow it to." "How can you be so certain?" Takashi asked, his voice raw with emotion. "Because I see you," Yukiko replied. "I have watched you transform over these many months. The man who first came here was drowning in guilt and self-recrimination, using my music as a temporary escape from pain. But the man before me now has learned to carry his past without being crushed by it, has found ways to serve with honor while maintaining his conscience. That strength will not disappear simply because you face new challenges." Takashi reached out and took her hand, a shocking breach of propriety, but one that Yukiko did not pull away from. "When I return from this war," he said, "if I return, I want to speak with Okasan about a formal arrangement. I want the right to call upon you properly, to move beyond these Tuesday evenings into something more. Would that be acceptable to you?" Yukiko's heart raced. What he was proposing was significant. A samurai seeking to establish a formal relationship with a geisha, a connection that would have social and financial implications for both of them. "Yes," she said simply. "That would be acceptable. More than acceptable. But Takashi, you must focus on surviving this war, on maintaining the person you have become. Do not make promises about the future until you are certain you can keep them." "Then I will do everything in my power to survive," he vowed. "And when I return, we will speak of the future properly." The war Lord Yamamoto had predicted came swiftly. Within 2 weeks, Takashi and the other samurai in his service were mobilized. Yukiko did not see him leave, such things were not done publicly, but she knew the day he departed, felt his absence like a physical ache. The Tuesdays that followed were difficult. Yukiko still performed, still played her shamisen with skill and passion, but her heart was not fully in it. She worried constantly about Takashi, about whether he would survive, whether he would be able to maintain his newfound peace in the midst of violence and chaos. She played the pieces he had loved most, partly as a way to feel connected to him, partly as a form of prayer to whatever powers might protect him. Fumiko and the other geisha offered comfort and support. "He is a skilled warrior," Fumiko reminded her. "And he has something precious to return to. Those are powerful reasons to survive." Months passed with no word. The war ebbed and flowed, reports filtering back to Kyoto of battles won and lost, of casualties and heroism. Yukiko tried to learn what she could about Lord Yamamoto's forces, but information was scarce and often contradictory. She could only wait, hope, and continue her performances, each Tuesday evening marked by the absence of the man who had become so important to her. It was on a Tuesday evening in early spring, as the cherry blossoms were just beginning to bloom again, that Yukiko sensed a change in the atmosphere of the tea-house. Okasan was moving through the room with unusual energy, and the other geisha kept glancing at Yukiko with knowing smiles. She tried to focus on her performance, but distraction made her fingers clumsy on the strings. Then she looked up and saw him. Takashi stood in the entrance to the tea-house, still wearing his traveling clothes, dusty from the road. He looked thinner than she remembered, and there were new scars visible on his hands and face. But his eyes, when they met hers, were clear and alive, and the smile that crossed his face made Yukiko's heart leap. She nearly stopped playing entirely but forced herself to continue, to finish the piece she had begun. The other patrons noticed Takashi and began to whisper, recognizing him as the silent patron who had disappeared months ago. But Takashi paid them no attention. He moved through the room to his customary place and sat, his posture relaxing for the first time since entering, and listened. Yukiko played pieces of homecoming, of spring after winter, of joy returning after sorrow. She poured all her relief and happiness into the music, and she could see Takashi receiving it, his expression softening, the tension of war slowly leaving his shoulders. When she finished, he stood and bowed deeply, and then, in front of everyone, he spoke clearly. "I have returned from war, and I have kept my promise. I maintained my humanity, even in the midst of chaos. And now I wish to speak with Oka-san about formal arrangements, if Yukiko-san will still have me." The tea-house erupted in surprised murmurs, but Yukiko barely heard them. She stood, set down her shamisen carefully, and walked to where Takashi stood. She bowed formally, maintaining proper decorum even as her heart raced. "I will speak with Oka-san as well," she said. "Your return is the answer to many prayers, Takashi-sama." Oka-san, practical as always despite the drama of the moment, stepped forward. "This is a conversation best held in private," she said firmly. "Takashi-sama, if you will accompany me to the back room, we can discuss terms properly. Yukiko, finish your performance for your other patrons. There will be time for private conversations later." And so it was arranged. Takashi and Oka-san negotiated through that evening and into the next day. The arrangement they reached was generous. Takashi would become Yukiko's patron, providing financial support to the tea-house in exchange for her exclusive availability. It was a formal relationship, recognized and respected, that would allow them to build something meaningful while maintaining the social structures that govern their world. The months that followed were among the happiest of Yukiko's life. Takashi came not just on Tuesdays now, but several times each week. Sometimes he would listen to her play, sometimes they would simply talk, sharing their thoughts on literature, philosophy, the small beauties of daily life. He told her stories of the war, of the fear and the violence, but also of how he had held on to the lessons he had learned, had treated both enemies and allies with a humanity that had surprised his fellow warriors. "There was a moment in battle," he told her one evening, "when I had an enemy at my mercy. He was young, barely more than a boy, and I could see the terror in his eyes. The old me, the man I was 3 years ago, would have killed him without hesitation or thought. But I remembered your words, about maintaining my humanity. So I disarmed him and sent him fleeing back to his own lines. Some of my comrades thought me weak for it. But I knew it was strength, not weakness, to choose mercy when possible." "I am proud of you," Yukiko said simply, and she saw how much those words meant to him. Their relationship continued to deepen. Takashi was still bound by his duties as a samurai, still served Lord Yamamoto, though in roles that did not require him to compromise his conscience. Yukiko continued her work at the Moonlit Crane, though she no longer performed for general audiences, instead focusing her art on private gatherings and on the evenings she spent with Takashi. One evening, 2 years after their first conversation, Takashi brought another gift. This time it was a small scroll, and when Yukiko unrolled it, she found a poem written in Takashi's careful calligraphy. "In the tea-house where music dwells a warrior found his soul returned through strings of silk and notes that speak the frozen heart learned to burn." She asked him why he came each week. He could not speak his truth, but in her art he found the path back to his distant youth. When honor bound and duty called, her melody was his guide through war and pain. He held her song close kept and fortified. Now cherry blossoms bloom again, and he has come back home to where the Shamisen still sings, where he need not be alone. Yukiko read the poem, tears streaming down her face. She had never heard Takashi speak of his feelings so directly, so openly. The vulnerability and honesty in his words touched her deeply. "I am not a poet," Takashi said softly. "These words are clumsy compared to your music. But I wanted you to know, to understand fully, what you have given me. You did not just play songs that I found beautiful. You helped me find my way back to myself, helped me understand that being strong does not mean being unfeeling, that honor and humanity can coexist. You showed me that there is still beauty in this world worth protecting, worth living for. Takashi, Yukiko whispered, you give me too much credit. The strength to change was always within you. I simply played music. You did the hard work of transformation. Then we shall agree, Takashi said with a smile, that we found in each other what we both needed. You needed to understand the profound impact your art could have, and I needed to learn that seeking help, seeking beauty, seeking peace is not a weakness but a form of wisdom. Yukiko nodded, carefully rolling up the scroll to preserve it. I will treasure this always, she said. Not because it is a poem, though it is a beautiful one, but because it shows me who you have become. The man who first entered this tea-house could never have written these words. He was too locked inside himself, too afraid to be vulnerable. But you have learned to open your heart, and that is perhaps the greatest transformation of all. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, the sounds of the tea-house muted around them. Through the paper screens, they could hear the gentle patter of spring rain, and somewhere in the distance, the call of a nightingale. It was a moment of perfect peace, the kind that both of them had learned to recognize and appreciate. Takashi, Yukiko said after a time, may I ask you something? Anything, he replied. On that first night, when you came to the tea-house and heard me play, what was it specifically that called to you? What made you return that first time? Takashi considered the question carefully, as he always did when she asked him something meaningful. I was walking through the streets that night, after another day of forcing myself to function while feeling hollow inside. I was considering things I should not have been considering, dark paths that seemed easier than continuing to carry my burden. And then I heard your Shamisen, the notes floating out into the evening air. The melody you were playing, I don't even remember what it was, spoke to something deep inside me that I thought had died. It reminded me that beauty still existed, that there were still things in this world worth experiencing. So I followed the sound, and I entered, and for the first time in months, I felt something other than guilt and emptiness. I felt hope, perhaps, or at least the memory of what hope felt like. He paused, looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. That is why I kept returning. Each week, I would tell myself it was foolish, that I should stop relying on a crutch, that I should face my demons alone as a proper samurai should. But every Tuesday, I would find myself drawn back here, drawn to your music, drawn to the possibility that perhaps I could heal, that perhaps I did not have to remain broken forever. You were the thread that kept me tethered to life, Yukiko. I don't think I ever properly thanked you for that. You do not need to thank me, Yukiko said softly. But I am glad I could be that for you. And I must confess something as well. When you first began coming, I barely noticed you. You were just another patron, silent and unobtrusive. But as the weeks passed and you kept returning, I became curious. Then concerned. Then invested in whatever journey you were on. I began choosing my pieces on Tuesdays with you in mind, hoping somehow that the right melody might reach whatever place inside you needed reaching. I told myself it was simply professional pride, wanting to serve my audience well. But it became something more. She smiled, a touch of color rising in her cheeks despite her training in maintaining composure. I found myself looking forward to Tuesdays in a way I never had before. Found myself disappointed on the rare occasions when you could not come. The other geisha teased me, said I was falling in love with a ghost, since you never spoke or engaged. But they were not entirely wrong. I was falling in love, though I did not recognize it as such at the time. I was falling in love with your dedication, your persistence, your silent respect for my art. And when you finally spoke to me, when you shared your burden, I knew that what I felt was deeper than simple curiosity or professional satisfaction. Takashi reached out and gently took her hand, a gesture that had become familiar between them over the past 2 years. We found each other in the darkness, he said. Two people struggling with different burdens, brought together by music and fate and Tuesday evenings in a tea-house. It seems almost implausible when I say it aloud, and yet it is the most real thing in my life. Not implausible, Yukiko corrected gently. Serendipitous. The world works in mysterious ways, bringing together the people who need each other most. You needed my music, and I needed to understand the true power of what I create. We both needed to learn that vulnerability is not weakness, that asking for help or offering it is an act of courage. The rain outside intensified, drumming steadily on the roof. Inside the tea house, lanterns flickered gently, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Yukiko felt a profound sense of contentment, a feeling that everything had happened exactly as it needed to, that all the pain and struggle had led to this moment of understanding and connection. "What do you think will happen now?" Takashi asked. "Our arrangement is formal and recognized, but it exists in a particular social context. I am still a samurai with duties to fulfill. You are still a geisha with responsibilities to Okasan and the tea house. How do we move forward from here?" It was a practical question, the kind that Takashi's orderly mind would naturally gravitate toward. Yukiko appreciated that about him, his ability to be deeply emotional and poetic one moment, then grounded and pragmatic the next. "I think," Yukiko said slowly, "that we continue as we are for now. You come when you can. I play for you, and we talk, and we build this connection deeper. Perhaps eventually, when circumstances allow, we might speak of more permanent arrangements. But there is no need to rush. We have time." "Do we?" Takashi asked, a shadow passing over his face. "I am a samurai in service to a lord who makes enemies easily. You are a geisha in a profession that changes with the winds of fashion and fortune. Time is not always the abundant resource we think it is." Yukiko understood his concern. The war had taught him the fragility of life, the way plans could be disrupted by violence or circumstance. But she also believed that they had to trust in the strength of what they had built. "Then we make the most of the time we have," she said firmly. "We do not let fear of loss prevent us from fully experiencing what we have found. That is a lesson you taught me, Takashi, through your own journey. You could have let fear and guilt paralyze you completely, but instead you chose to seek healing, to remain open to possibility. Now you must trust that same courage." Takashi smiled, the worry easing from his expression. "You are wise beyond your years, Yukiko." "I am a geisha," she replied with a slight smile. "We are trained to understand the human heart, to navigate complex emotions and social situations. But I will admit that you have taught me things my training never covered, about the depth of suffering that can exist in a person, about the long and difficult path of healing, about the way love can grow quietly over time, nurtured by consistency and respect rather than grand gestures." "Speaking of grand gestures," Takashi said, his tone lightening, "I have been thinking about your birthday next month. Okasan mentioned it in passing, and I would like to do something to mark the occasion properly." "You do not need to," Yukiko protested. "Your presence is gift enough. Nevertheless, I want to. You have given me so much: peace, hope, purpose, love. Allow me to celebrate the day you came into this world, for I am profoundly grateful that you did." Yukiko felt warmth spread through her chest. Even after 2 years, Takashi still had the ability to surprise her with his thoughtfulness, his sincere expressions of gratitude and affection. "Very well," she agreed. "Though I insist on nothing extravagant. Something meaningful rather than expensive." "I shall think on it carefully," Takashi promised. The weeks leading up to Yukiko's birthday were busy ones. Lord Yamamoto was hosting a series of diplomatic meetings with representatives from other provinces, and Takashi was required to attend many of them as part of the Lord's security detail. He still managed to come to the tea house when he could, though less frequently than usual, and Yukiko could see the strain the additional responsibilities placed on him. "I worry about you," she told him one evening when he arrived looking particularly exhausted. "You are pushing yourself too hard." "I have no choice," Takashi replied. "Lord Yamamoto demands much of those who serve him, and I must fulfill my obligations if I am to maintain my position and the resources that allow me to support you and the tea house." "I would rather have less support and more of your company," Yukiko said, then immediately felt guilty for the complaint. She knew how difficult Takashi's position was, caught between duty and desire. "Once these meetings conclude, things will ease," Takashi assured her. "And I promise, regardless of what else is happening, I will be here for your birthday. That is one commitment I will not break." True to his word, on the evening of Yukiko's birthday, Takashi arrived at the tea house early, before the general patrons began to arrive. He had arranged with Okasan for a private room, and when Yukiko entered, she gasped at what she saw. The room had been transformed into a miniature garden, with carefully arranged branches of cherry blossoms in full bloom, despite the fact that the season for them had passed. Small lanterns hung from the branches, creating a soft, magical glow. In the center of the room sat a low table with an exquisite meal prepared by one of Kyoto's finest chefs. And beside the table stood a shamisen. Not just any shamisen, but one of such obvious quality and craftsmanship that Yukiko immediately recognized it as the work of a legendary instrument maker. "Takashi," she breathed, "this is too much. The shamisen alone must have cost an amount I was happy to pay," Takashi interrupted gently. "I know you said nothing extravagant, and I debated long about the shamisen. But I wanted you to have an instrument worthy of your talent, one that would allow your art to reach its fullest potential. The maker is a friend of sorts, a man I saved during the war. When I told him what I wanted and who it was for, he insisted on taking the commission, said it would be an honor to create an instrument for a geisha whose music had such profound effect." Yukiko approached the shamisen with reverence, her fingers ghosting over the rich wood, the perfectly tensioned strings. She could see immediately that this was an instrument of the highest caliber, one that would respond to the slightest touch, that would sing with a clarity and resonance her current shamisen, good as it was, could not match. "I do not know what to say," she murmured. "This is a gift beyond measure." "Then say nothing," Takashi suggested. "Simply play for me. Let me hear how your music sounds on an instrument that matches your skill." Yukiko carefully lifted the shamisen, feeling its perfect weight and balance. She settled into position, the new instrument feeling both strange and immediately right in her hands. She closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself, and then began to play. The sound that emerged was extraordinary. The shamisen responded to her touch with a sensitivity she had never experienced before, allowing her to express nuances of emotion she had previously only imagined. She played a piece she had composed herself, one she had been working on for months, titled The Journey of the Silent Patron. It told the story of their relationship through music, the initial loneliness and pain, the gradual opening, the healing, the love that had grown between them. The new shamisen gave voice to every emotion, every transition, with breathtaking clarity. When she finished, Yukiko opened her eyes to find Takashi staring at her with an expression of wonder. "That was extraordinary," he said quietly. "I have heard you play hundreds of times, and you have always been skilled. But that was transcendent. The instrument and the artist perfectly matched." "It is a magnificent gift," Yukiko said, setting the shamisen down carefully. "Thank you does not begin to express my gratitude. There is one more thing," Takashi said. He reached into his kimono and withdrew a small wooden box. "This is a more personal gift, something I hope you will wear." Yukiko opened the box to find a delicate hair ornament, a kanzashi made of silver and jade, carved in the shape of a crane in flight. It was beautiful, elegant, and clearly expensive, though less ostentatious than many such ornaments could be. "A crane for the moonlit crane tea house," Takashi explained. "But also because cranes mate for life, and I wanted to give you something that expressed my intention. I know we cannot marry in the conventional sense. My position as a samurai and your role as a geisha make that impossible under current social structures. But I want you to know that in my heart, you are my partner, my companion, my chosen person for as long as life allows." Yukiko felt tears welling up, despite her training in maintaining composure. The kanzashi was not just a beautiful object but a symbol, a declaration of Takashi's commitment that was as close to a marriage proposal as their circumstances would permit. "I accept," she said softly. "And I give you the same promise. Regardless of what social conventions say, regardless of what others might think, you are my chosen person, Takashi. I am yours, and you are mine, and that is enough." Takashi moved closer and, in a gesture that still felt daring despite their years together, he gently wiped the tears from her cheeks with his thumb. They sat together in the transformed room, surrounded by cherry blossoms and lantern light, and shared the meal he had arranged. They talked about everything and nothing, their memories of how they met, their hopes for the future, small observations about daily life that meant everything precisely because they could share them with each other. As the evening drew to a close, Yukiko played once more on her new shamisen, this time pieces that spoke of joy and celebration, of love acknowledged and cherished. And Takashi listened, as he had from the very beginning, but now with full understanding of what the music meant, what the musician meant, what they had built together note by careful note. The years that followed were not without challenges. Takashi continued to serve Lord Yamamoto, and there were times when his duties took him away from Kyoto for weeks or even months. Political tensions ebbed and flowed, occasionally threatening to erupt into violence again. Yukiko continued her work at the Moonlit Crane, though her role evolved as she took on more responsibilities teaching younger geisha the arts she had mastered. But through all the changes and challenges, Tuesday remained sacred. No matter what else was happening, if Takashi was in Kyoto, he came to the tea house on Tuesday evening. Sometimes they were able to spend the entire evening together in private. Other times he could only stay for an hour or two, called away by duty or necessity. But he always came, and Yukiko always played for him, and their connection continued to deepen and strengthen. They learned to appreciate the small moments, a shared glance across a crowded room, the brush of fingers as he arrived or departed, the quiet conversations in the early morning hours when the tea house was empty and they could simply be two people who loved each other, without titles or roles or social expectations. 5 years after Yukiko first asked Takashi why he came to the tea house, on a Tuesday evening in spring when the cherry blossoms were once again in full bloom, they sat together in their customary private room. Yukiko had just finished playing a new composition, and Takashi was quiet, contemplative. "What are you thinking?" Yukiko asked. "I am thinking about how different my life might have been if I had not heard your Shamisen that night," Takashi replied. "I was so close to giving up entirely, to taking a dark path that I cannot even bear to imagine now. But your music called me back, gave me something to hold on to when I had nothing else." "And now?" Yukiko prompted gently. "Now I have everything," Takashi said simply. "I have purpose in my work, having learned to serve with honor while maintaining my humanity. I have peace in my heart, having learned to carry my past without being crushed by it. And I have you, your music, your wisdom, your love. I have been blessed beyond what I deserve." "We have both been blessed," Yukiko corrected. "Because I found purpose, too, in understanding the true power of art, the way music can heal and transform. And I found love, deep and abiding, with a man who values beauty even in a world that often demands only strength." She picked up her shamisen, the magnificent instrument Takashi had given her, which had become an extension of herself over the years. "Shall I play for you?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Always," Takashi replied, settling into his listening position, his eyes closing, his breathing deepening. "Always play for me, Yukiko. It is the thing I need most in this world." And so she played, as she had played for him countless times before and would play countless times again. She played songs of love and healing, of perseverance and hope, of two souls who had found each other in darkness and built a life together in the light. The notes of the shamisen filled the room, spilling out into the tea house, drifting through the streets of Kyoto like cherry blossoms on the wind. Outside, the city continued its busy life, unaware of the quiet miracle happening in the Moonlit Crane tea house, the miracle of two people who had saved each other, note by note, week by week, until they had created something beautiful and enduring. It was not a story that would be written in history books or sung in great ballads. It was simply the story of a samurai who learned to open his heart and a geisha who learned the true depth of her art, and how they found in each other exactly what they needed most. The music played on, as it always would, every Tuesday evening, a constant in a changing world, a testament to the healing power of beauty and the quiet strength of love that grows slowly, carefully, and lasts forever.